So thank you for inviting me to give this brief presentation. My name is Katerina Falk, and I work as a group leader at the Helmholtz-Zentrum in Dresden-Rossendorf in Germany, where I work as a plasma physicist, leading my own research group, which started something like 3 years ago. I was asked to talk about mentoring and specifically with respect to scientific careers. This is probably something which is not necessarily new for many of you. You obviously know that there is certain lineage or line sequence that the usual scientific careers actually follow you. First, you get your bachelor's or master's degree. You might get a couple of internships, try out how science works for you, and then you go and enroll for PhD. After your PhD, you might do a couple of postdocs, and then what happens next? There are several different routes that scientists usually take. I mean, the one that we usually aim for is the academic research and teaching. That's the route that leads to professorship. Only about less than 2% of people actually make it to that stage, whether they want to or at some point they realize actually that's not something for them. Which also leaves, which therefore leaves a lot of other options. So obviously people do other things. You can do science for national research laboratories. You can go into the industry. That's often quite a popular, reasonably well-paid option, while still doing something scientific or technical related to your field. Or you could just completely leave and do something completely different. And this is something that you often actually discuss with your mentors too. So I'm going to get to that later. So there's a little bit of a layout, but obviously because there's such a leaky pipeline, just look at this. I mean, only so very few people actually make it in science. It raises a lot of questions. I mean, it's obviously sounds like something which is quite stressful. It can be fun. It can be a life mission. Is this a career? A lot of people actually worry about things like grant applications. Is this something you're going to have to do for the rest of your life? Chances are that you might have to. And what is actually life as a scientist? And quite often you might ask yourself, do you even have a life? You know, is this something which is associated with way too much work and constant burnout situations? So I'm gonna, in order to kind of center your mind around this, I'm gonna first try to focus on what actually makes a scientist. How is a scientist born? And that often goes very early on into your childhood, somewhere you suddenly find an inspiration. So for me, it would have been a lot of science fiction and popular science books. You have to suddenly go like, yes, this is amazing. I would like to know what these stars are. But you also need support. You need to have supportive parents, good schools, somebody who's going to be willing to buy you that telescope or the first microscope, or support your crazy experiments you might want to do as an early chemist or something like that. And this kind of goes into this whole mentoring. Mentor is somebody who shows you the way, who shows you options, who broadens your horizons. And then obviously you have to study a lot. But we were going to talk about the mentors and mentoring. Mentor is not necessarily somebody who's your academic supervisor. It doesn't have to be a teacher. It can be anybody. It could be even your neighbor. You know, it could be a crazy person who lives next door who has a collection of old, I don't know, microscopes or cameras, and suddenly gets you into that hobby. So this is something that you look out for. It could be formal, informal. And often this binds into so-called role models. For many of us, it might even be that there are not many people who might just look like you and go like, do I actually see myself out there as this specific person? Do I see myself as a scientist, if science is the thing that interests you? For me, these role models have been these two characters. It can be actually even a fictional one. This is a snapshot from the movie Contact. That's when I was like, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And then I read about this lady who actually, this is Jocelyn Burnell. She discovered the pulsar stars. And I was like, wow, she's done these amazing things. And I was only a child when I read about her. I was like, okay, I can now see myself doing that. And quite often it can happen that mentor and role model might even be the same person. So I'm going to get to that a little later. But first, I'm actually going to introduce who I am, where I come from, and actually try to give you a little bit of a background so you actually understand where I'm coming from. So I'm a plasma physicist. Plasma is a fourth state of matter. You would find it mostly somewhere in space, but it's also the thing that makes the northern lights, for example. This pretty much everything you see in the night sky and it's shining, that's plasma. It's ionized gas, and it can come in various shapes and forms. And the types of plasmas that I usually try to study with my research is the very dense ones you would find inside planets like Jupiter. So we use big laser facilities to create these sort of plasmas and also probe them. But in order to get to this, I did have to go through those long studies. So this is from my earliest slide. It actually does take quite a while to get there. I was very fortunate to win a couple of scholarships to first go to the UK already as a high school student. So I studied in Scotland and London, later in Oxford. And this actually got me in touch with professionally well-organized institutional mentoring programs early on. So the Anglo-Saxon system already has an inbuilt system within itself, which does that. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but this was extremely beneficial for me because these people knew what they were doing and could really guide my way as a young, naive student through my studies. This led on to a reasonably long and fruitful scientific career. I later moved to the US to do my postdoc and back to Prague for a bit. And now I live in Germany. And I've actually been alternating between research institutes, national labs, and now I actually started lecturing at the university as well, working on my habilitation and potentially professorship as well. So it's one can really have a bit of a combined career and jump around a little bit. Such path always comes with multiple milestones, and you often find yourself in crossroads. And that's precisely what happened to me, and many times. So already as a student, I was struggling with all that. That exam is difficult. Am I good enough for this? It was very useful to have mentors to show you how you can actually achieve and get over all these hurdles and achieve that scientific career. And as I was coming to the completion of my PhD, I was actually questioning, should I stay in science? I mean, is science actually for me? I mean, this was a very stressful experience working on a doctorate, and I heard all these horror stories about grant applications and all these options. Like, is this something which is worth it? And this is where mentoring comes in hand. Then my first child was born. I mean, again, how do you balance motherhood with a career in science, or the stereotypes, or just the lack of time and sleep? I mean, this is not necessarily a simple task. And again, it's really helpful to have somebody who's already made that step and who can tell you about it. I've encountered bad work situations when I found out, actually, this institution is not for me. It's not going anywhere. What do I do now? I was already pretty high up in my career ladder. It meant I had to become independent and apply for those grants. This is where a mentor really saved me, and it was extremely good experience to have gone through mentoring experience here. Now, second child is on the way. I'm planning my next career steps, habilitation, etc. And once again, mentoring is something that is showing me the path. So at any stage of a career, it can be extremely helpful or even enlightening. So as I was mentioning, actually, I was extremely fortunate to have studied in the UK. Pretty much any, at least decent quality UK educational institution has a mentoring program. They might not call it mentoring. The one at Imperial College where I was a student was called, they called them personal tutors. And they basically acted as mentors. They were not our teachers or our lecturers. In fact, they were specifically selected as somebody who would never be examining you or deciding about your marks. Quite often they would actually choose somebody who would match your life experience. So for example, we were doing physics. most of the lady students actually got lady mentors, which turned out to be very useful for me, because this is my old mentor from Imperial College London. This is astrophysicist Eva Nunu, which was great because I was interested in astrophysics, and she was a lady who had 2 small children. At that time, I was questioning, is it even possible to have children and do science? The fact that I just saw her in front of me was a direct proof that, yes, of course, this is not a problem. And we would often talk about my struggles, but she would also talk about herself. So I was able to get a glimpse into that distant future of a young lady scientist, mother, balancing it all and doing really high class, top class research. And she became a little bit of a role model for me too, in that sense. So it was, this is where these roles kind of combined. It was really great. I've had mentors in pretty much every stage of my career, during after my postdoc. Even now, I've entered a mentoring program. This is Professor Jana Rojtová, who was my mentor in Prague. This is when I was deciding, should I become an independent researcher with my own group? She gave me excellent advice and really helped me through this process and helped me figure out how to actually approach this and do this right. And I'm eternally grateful, because I do believe she's really saved my career, because at that time I really didn't know even how to start this process. You know, where does it lead, and you know, how do you actually get on with it? So, and in a sense, she also became a role model in many ways, as a very successful group leader, and somebody who's already walked this path and managed these really big grants. So I was successful and I actually got those. So I was a mentee many times, and I'm still a mentee, but I've also been a mentor. And this is one thing which you often don't even realize. A lot of mentoring happens informally. I've been a mentor to many students, usually Czech students trying to study abroad. And at that time, I didn't even realize I was mentoring them, because I was studying in the UK. And there would be high school students asking me questions. How did you manage that? How did you apply? What did you apply for? And later in life, I realized I was actually mentoring these people. I joined in more professional programs. I combined my efforts with a couple of institutions and organizations. I started mentoring high school students through the National Contact Centrum Center in Prague, the Academy of Sciences. That was a very nice experience. Many of the students are still in touch with me. I was then asked to start mentoring for Edith. This is the student in the picture here, at Vysoké in Prague. That was also great. She was already at a Ph.D. level. She's now a successful scientist starting a postdoc in Berlin, pretty much as we speak. So we're still in touch, and it's actually been a really great experience mentoring her. And I've also done some work for the British Chamber of Commerce, which was surprisingly quite different, because it wasn't a scientific one. This was more about writing, because I had written a book and they linked me with a lady who was an aspiring writer. And it's always been very enlightening for me on both sides of things. So what I've actually learned about mentoring are several quite key and important points. First of all, mentor is not the same as academic supervisor. This is the most common mistake, usually in the Czech environment, where people think, oh, I'm a supervisor of PhD students, they found their mentor. You're not, and you should never be. In fact, there's a serious problem with a conflict of interest, and that's something that the Anglo-Saxon world has discovered a long time ago. Your academic supervisor or your manager is somebody who wants something from you. You're working for them. You're their subordinate. They can be very helpful, and they should be your guide. But you cannot come to them with all personal questions, struggles, etc., because this is not it's not an equal power or independent relationship. So mentor is usually, and the rules are, and as I was already mentioning from the example from Imperial College, you should never be somebody who's examining you or deciding about your future career, etc. It's somebody who's completely independent, can be from the same institution or from the same science, but it should not be, you should not be dependent on them in any specific or direct way. It's someone who just gives you independent advice. It's also not a coach. It's not somebody who teaches you specific skills. It's just somebody who talks about their life experiences several steps ahead of you, and who you can confine in even with personal questions and really help to figure out the right way. Mentoring extremely helpful at any stage of career. I hope I've already proven that on my own example. It always puts thoughts in perspective, because just bouncing your own ideas and things the way you see them right now, and your confusion about the next steps of somebody who's actually just a couple of steps ahead of you, who's already taken those steps, it's extremely useful, because they will have that different perspective. And if you build up a good relationship with them, you can really bounce off many ideas of them, and they can give you a new insight into things. They definitely will have a lot more experience, so they will help you explore options and new ideas. I found it always has grown my self-confidence. When I worried that, oh, maybe I should not apply for that, it's too difficult, the mentor encouraged me to do so, and I succeeded. Or even if I did not succeed, it was something that just taking that step was very important for growing your own self-esteem, saying, okay, I can do this. I've pretty much always built a decent friendship with my mentor. This is not given, but it often happens. These people, if they want to be mentors, they are open-minded, and they usually find a nice way to one another. As a mentor, it's been extremely useful for me to actually have mentees and talk to students, because now as I'm teaching and leading my own PhD students and bachelor students as a supervisor, it is very helpful to see the perspective from that earlier career stage. You may not actually necessarily always remember what it was like when I was a struggling PhD student. And just being a mentor to somebody else who's not in your group, but just seeing the same struggle all over again is a very important reminder that, you know, I was there, and therefore it helps to build empathy to your own students, and it makes you a better supervisor. So I would actually encourage pretty much anybody to try to be a mentor too, if he can be. And often you even learn new things, because, you know, as the generations go, there are actually new struggles, there are new things that are happening. And it's actually quite good to have that perspective. I already did say, mentoring has saved my career. Quite often I was really ready to give up. It was too much. It was the next step felt it was like way too difficult. And it turned out it was okay, thanks to the mentor who showed me how to tackle that next step. So it's very, very useful. So for me, the scientific career has been a bit of a dream come true. If you remember that picture of the role models with Jocelyn Bernal, so this is this lady here giving me a prize at the Parliament, the British Parliament in London. So it was quite a big moment, because this lady is fantastic, and we became friendly too when she was a professor at Oxford. I've actually made it to this place, which was in my favorite movie, Contact, because I worked in New Mexico, and this was just a couple of hours drive from Santa Fe. So it has been quite a fun ride for all these things to happen. But it's also been difficult, and it was important to keep some sort of work and life balance, because as we know, you hear it all the time, you've probably experienced it yourself, scientific careers can be stressful. It's one of those professions with the highest rate of mental issues and stress-induced disorders. So it's very important to be quite careful about that, and a mentor can help you find that balance, because they had to find it themselves first too. And I did mention this before too, balancing it with family and relationships can be challenging. And I was able to do that, and I hope I will continue being able to do so. So this is, again, one question that kept on coming up with in my mentoring on both sides multiple times, and definitely a topic to discuss too. Not only your scientific achievements or plans. So before I end, I was asked to give a couple of practical points for early career scientists on what they should do in order to succeed. I always like to tell everybody, start early. So I already tell even high school and university students, do internships, try out research and see what it's like, and get your contacts through that too. International experience is very important. And when I say international experience, I do not mean that you go for 3 to 6 months somewhere and think that you've experienced another country. You haven't. If you haven't lived somewhere for minimum 1 to 2 years, you haven't actually really gone to a new environment and started a new project and really learned how to live with new type of work, collectives, culture, even language, you name it. It's really quite important to do something, go for a PhD or for a postdoc, and really spend one time at least once somewhere else. It's also quite often a requirement for the grant applications. Even if they say it's only 6 months, you will be a way better scientist if you actually do something longer and more proper. This is an advice I was given very early on as a master's student. Move between groups and institutions. Do not having one good name. So I started collecting names of institutions on my CV, and it really did pay off. It was not just the pieces of paper, but it's actually been the experience itself, which combines with the whole international experience part too. Just the broader experience base you have, the better scientist you will be, more employable, and better perspective you will have both on life and your career. Pick your supervisor or manager very, very carefully. There's nothing worse than being stuck with a bad boss. And I can tell you that I've made this mistake multiple times, at least twice. I've also had really good ones, so I can tell that there is a huge difference. And it's always better if you're not having to run away from a place that you did not strive in, and it can have a very negative impact both on your mental health and your future career. So pick carefully, speak to the people who already work in that group or so, and try to get an idea of what it's actually like, not only on the advertisement or the name of the institution. Always try to broaden horizon, get wider perspectives, get more experience, even shift fields slightly. The more you know, the broader range of experience you have, the more employable you will always be. Yeah, this is obvious. Always try to keep up with what's happening in research. Go to conferences and do not be afraid to present, especially Czech students. I always find that they're not necessarily very assertive in trying to show off their achievements. It's probably a cultural thing coming from the old Eastern Bloc. No, look at the Americans. They will have way worse stuff than you've ever done. And they will show it off like the best thing that has discovered the whole universe. So do it like that. And while you're doing it, build your contacts. Networks are extremely important also in science. Scientist is not a lonely creature that is locked up in a lab and hopes that somebody will notice and gives them a Nobel Prize in 30 years. You have to be able to sell yourself, and you have to have a peer group, because the next job doesn't happen the way you go online and apply for a position that's been advertised. The moment most of those positions are advertised, they've already been taken by somebody who had a contact in that institution earlier. They just have to advertise it. And that's precisely how I got most of my positions too. So go and speak to people informally, go to the pub after the conferences and meet new people. This is how it's done. And always remember what made you want to be a scientist in the first place. So every once in a while, I have a look at that Contact movie to remind myself of that little girl, running around the hills in Zlín. And in a way makes me remember all my mentors too, because these were the motivations and these were the original things that decided made me decide that this is what I want to do, and always reminds me why I like doing it. Because when you do get into those stressful situations every once in a while, it's very easy to forget that and lose that spark in in what you're actually doing. So try not to lose it or lose the sight of it. So anyway, I thank you for your attention. Since I cannot take any questions, since this is recorded, here's my email in case you do have questions, something specific for me, then I'm happy to answer any of those. Just contact me directly. So thank you for your attention once more, and good luck.